Hello and welcome to this talk with DCD. My name is Tam Pledger. I'm a channel manager, and today I am joined in the studio by Steve Lim, Senior Vice President of Marketing and GTM Strategy at NTT Global Data Centers. Hi, Steve. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning. Good afternoon. How are you?
I am very well, and I'm excited to talk a little bit more about the topic we have today. So we're going to be touching on global expansion and the drivers behind growth. Steve, before we get into it, could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself, introduce what your focus is on, and a little bit more about NTT for those that are not familiar with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try and be quick. So I run marketing and our go-to-market practice at NTT Global Data Centers. We are, I guess on paper today, the third largest co-location data center provider globally. This is, the third data center company I've been at. So I've been in this industry for a while, spent time both at Equinix and Vantage prior to coming here, and now have been here for the last 6 years or so, running primarily the marketing function, but we're building our go-to-market over the last year or so, which has been a fun challenge, a fun adventure. So, as we're here today, really talking about kind of market trends and drivers, it's one of the things that I get most excited about is to think about and watch where this industry is going.
Yeah, so you've been in the industry a long time. You've seen a lot of changes. Of course, AI is the hot topic, but I know it's not the only thing that we're seeing in the industry. How much of near-term growth do you expect to be that AI-driven growth, and how much of that remains traditional IT?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a good topic that everyone's spending a lot of time talking about. AI, as we all know, is the hot item. It is driving awareness of the data center space like never before, and the growth is significant. We're seeing huge deployments that are happening mostly in the U.S., but starting to move into other markets as well. What I think is important to remember, or what I think is starting to get overlooked a little bit, is traditional hyperscale business, cloud services, and enterprises are still growing really fast. By some early estimates, the data center business was growing at about a 20 to 24% CAGR, and the AI component initially they were saying was an additional 10 to 15% on top of that. I suspect over the last 6 to 8 months that number might be creeping up a little bit. And so what you're seeing is really two significant drivers in parallel that are both growing and driving the business. And so while everyone's talking about AI, I do think it's important to remember that that doesn't mean that AI is growing and everything else is slowing down. Everything else is still growing very quickly in addition, and it's just creating a compounding growth that is really explosively driving development in the data center industry.
Okay, so really growth across all fronts then, AI and now also enterprise. I'm interested, Steve, as we see enterprise kind of re-enter that colo market, what sort of AI capabilities must partners deliver? Where do you see that going?
Yeah, I'll put on my prognostication hat. We don't know for sure, but I think a couple things are interesting to remember as we talk about this growth and everyone talks about AI. The enterprise client, I believe, over the last few years, in some ways, has been shut out of the business. They've been, clients that are needing 3 megawatts, 6 megawatts, even 10 and 12 megawatts. Those deals are often going to the hyperscalers or had gone to some of the traditional early AI developments where those clients are coming in saying, I want everything you've got. I don't want a piece of it. I want all of it. And as a co-location provider, that's hard to pass up. And so finding a balance of how you serve those enterprises is the challenge that now I think has created through that situation. There's been some pent up demand that's now created. And so the enterprises are now starting to aggressively try and get into the market and meet their specific demands. Now, the second part of your question is really what is, the AI ready capabilities, or what are enterprises doing differently? I think what we're seeing with the enterprises in that deployment, and as that demand is starting to get met, that they are following the trends of AI and hyperscale like deployments. And the specific thing around that is really around density. And so everything, enterprises to hyperscale to AI, is a much, much denser deployment. And how you manage that is different than what we used to do 10 years ago. And in very simple terms, we're used to doing air-cooled data centers. We've been doing it for many, many years. We know how to do it well. All of our competitors, the industry, knows how to do that very well. Over the last couple of years, everything is moving to water, liquid to the chip, liquid to the rack, immersion, which is still a little bit newer, but something we're starting to see. And that allows you to cool much greater densities, much higher volume of power utilization at the rack level. And this is something we've seen from the hyperscales, and the AI is a necessity. We're starting to see the enterprises look at the same. And so they're coming to us saying, I need 6 or 12 megawatts, but it needs to be water cooled as well. And so I think that's one of the biggest trends at the enterprise level that we're also seeing. And that's where they're trailing along and drafting kind of some of the learnings from AI and hyperscale. And now we're applying those, slightly down market to those enterprise clients.
Thank you. That's a really good overview there. But I want to kind of pull this apart and expand it a little more. Can we talk about that global context and what we're seeing? I mean, in the US market alone, do you see AI as being one of the dominant growth phases, or is something else going to play within that market in the next 5, 10 years?
Yeah, I think AI will be the dominant piece. I think there's kind of two data points that are very interesting to think about. One is by one report that I think actually was something that your team reported on. They estimated that a little over 30 billion was spent on AI deployments in 2024 alone. That's a massive number. If we go back 5 and 6 years ago, and one of my prior companies with data center, we would spend about $1 billion, and that was a huge investment. And by today's standards, you can't really do much with $1 billion. And to see 30 billion spent in 1 year in the industry is dramatic. And that 30 billion was all on AI related deployments in the US. And so that's one number that shows what that demand is looking like. There's also a predictive report that McKinsey put out, and they're estimating that by 2030, 70% of the growth in data center space will be from AI. And so the US right now is the dominant player in AI development. I don't want to overlook what we just talked about, though, that the enterprise and the hyperscaler are still there. The needs are still there. So how we combine all those pieces of growth together, I think, is what we're going to see primarily in the US over the next, 3 to 5 years.
Okay, so it's painting a huge picture of demand there. But of course, it's not just the US market. We're seeing emerging markets, India especially, we're talking more and more about within these conversations.
Yeah.
How do you see build out shaping across those markets?
Yeah, India is an interesting one. We've got a lot of development going in India because the demand is so high. And one of the unique things about India is they are not the only, but one of the few that is kind of digital first. The traditional markets in the US and EMEA, it's an evolution from, traditional services, traditional wired connectivity essentially to India really didn't have that infrastructure. And so they've become a digital first country and region. And so that's driving growth and expansion in the data center space. You also have, just by population numbers, a very large embedded base that needs to be serviced and now needs digital first servicing. And so I think we're going to see explosive growth in India across multiple facets. I think we'll start to see more AI deployments. It's also a relatively lower cost market, so you can build, and I think land is available. There is greater availability than in some other regions like APAC, who has less availability. So I think we're going to see growth in there. I think one of the challenges is going to be stability of power in India, and regulation. It's still a little bit of a Wild West situation than compared to EMEA or US. And so how we manage that and how the country and the region manages that is something that will have to be addressed in a more formal way as this explosive growth continues.
Yeah, you mentioned there the APAC market. Considering that we're seeing the amount of constraints within those tier one markets across APAC, where do you see this next wave developing within tier twos?
If I knew the direct answer, I wouldn't tell you because we would say, hey, we're going to go try and corner that market. APAC is interesting because I think the traditional growth was in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and the those markets are just by land alone are very difficult. There isn't an unending amount of space to grow, and so what we're seeing is a bunch of additional markets kind of start to develop, whether that's Johor or Bangkok, Indonesia, Malaysia, different parts of Malaysia. So I don't know the answer, to be honest. I think we're seeing all of those markets start to come up and build out. And really what will drive that is land availability, power availability, and then does it have the right infrastructure from a networking and connectivity standpoint to be able to move that data in and out. And so I suspect all of them will grow into, tier 1 to 1A, whatever you want to call them. But I think we'll see that distributed across APAC to meet this significant demand that's coming.
Thank you. Yeah, good overview. I wish you did have the answer and you could tell it to me.
You and I would keep that to ourselves until we could figure out a way to take advantage of it.
After the talk, we'll discuss it.
Yeah.
But I think let's finish off kind of this global map that we're building, Steve. Let's talk to the EMEA region and what we're seeing in growth there. Can sustainability mandates, the hyperscale expansion that we're seeing, how is that going to advance across the market in the coming years?
Yeah, EMEA is an interesting one because you have a conglomeration of so many countries. I think we'll continue to see growth, and I cringe saying the acronym, but the FLAP countries, Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, the dominant tier 1 markets in EMEA. We'll see all of those continue to grow. There is still, although challenging, land and power availability in each of those markets, but not readily available like we see in some of the emerging countries. I think the AI growth we're starting to see move into Europe, and I think we're going to see a demand wave that will run 18 to 24 months behind what we're seeing in the US. I think it'll be distributed across multiple countries, and I think what we'll see is certain regions are going to get aggressive in vying for capturing that business. I think the two inhibitors, and you mentioned one of them, which is sustainability and ensuring that we build and deliver in a sustainable way that is a little more environmentally conscious than maybe some of the emergent countries. I think the other one that's going to be interesting, which is sitting there and not necessarily fully addressed, is the data sovereignty piece of it. I think one of the things with AI that's going to be very interesting, that's in the very early stages of being addressed, is how do we manage the information? Where does it sit? Where does it live? I think we're going to see more private AI, which could take us down a whole nother topic, but I think it's not going to be as simple as everyone, logging into ChatGPT and, putting their pieces in there. I think we're going to see a lot more private AI instances, and then it's going to have to be managed and maintained, in a region or in a country based on different regulations and laws around data sovereignty. And so data sovereignty is much more prevalent across Europe. Everyone's very familiar with GDPR and other regulations, and AI is going to have to be addressed, or GDPR will have to address AI and how we manage that. And so I think we'll see a distributed growth, but I do think it's going to be significant across multiple countries in Europe. The next challenge will be then is and I have a hard time saying it, but moving outside the FLAP countries. So that'll be the next thing you and I will work on, is how to rename that acronym into something better than that.
Something easier to say on a broadcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, considering we're coming to time, I'm going to throw one final question to you, Steve. From the constraints that you've mentioned, what do you see as being one of the biggest inhibitors for that larger growth scale?
I think there's three that I would say are the big things. Everything we've talked about over the last 10, 15 minutes is about this unending growth and demand. I think the three things that are constraining that, and we've touched on most of them, but I would say number one is power. is there enough power to support this? AI deployments, we talked about density and cooling that, but just the pure power alone is at a scale that we've never seen before. We used to talk about rack density of 3 and 4 kilowatts, right? We're now talking 100 to 100 plus. The latest NVIDIA chip, they're saying, could run a rack at 500 or a megawatt per rack, which is just mind-boggling to think about when we go back even 10 years ago. There isn't enough power to support the demand that sits today. So how do we address that? And there's a lot that's going on around that. We could spend the whole time talking about alternative power sources or power generation at the data center level. And so we're going to have to figure that out. Right now, that is the biggest constraint that's holding it back. The second, which we talked about, and I won't spend a lot of time, is just land. Where is it? Is it the right location? Does it have the connectivity? And land and power are intimately tied together. You can't look at one without the other. And so those two pieces are primary. The third, which we haven't talked a lot about, we touched on a little bit, and that's just capital. This is an expensive business to be in. The cost to build continues to go up. The cost of construction, the cost of the equipment, and building at this dramatically large scale. There was an announcement a couple of weeks ago with a single site, which was estimated to be a $20+ billion investment on a single campus. That's a massive campus, but that's a huge number. And so is there enough funding to go capture this business and build to meet this demand? So I think those are the three big inhibitors that are tempering this unceasing growth potential that we're seeing with AI and other things. How we address it and mitigate those three challenges, I think, is going to be the piece that will need to be balanced as we go forward.
I mean, that's incredible. Just saying, $1 billion is not enough now. Cliche as it is, Steve, it seems it's a new era.
Yeah, it's really wild. It's really, really wild, but it's fun. I think it's why we're all here. I think that's one of the things that we talk a lot about is 5 years ago when you said you worked in the data center industry, everyone would yawn and go on to the next person. Now everyone stops and goes, wait, tell me about this. I'm hearing about it and I want to know more. So we're all excited that we finally get to tell people what we do.
Fantastic. What a great place to leave that there. Steve, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Yeah. That was great.